Convene, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Strzok. Mr. Strzok, I too, like my colleagues, were disappointed to read the text messages, knowing that you had a serious career and had done a lot of good work and the questions it would raise. But I also appreciate that you have come here today and have owned them and have apologized for them. But I want to focus on your work as an investigator in counterintelligence. In your experience, do counterintelligence investigations take longer when subjects to investigations tamper with other witnesses?
Yes.
In your experience as a counterintelligence investigator, do counterintelligence investigations take longer when subjects lie to investigators?
Frequently, yes.
And as a counterintelligence investigator, do intelligence investigations take longer when subjects or witnesses refuse to cooperate and you have to go through the subpoena process?
Yes.
You're here and you're not taking the fifth.
That's correct.
Did you consider taking the fifth?
No.
Why not?
I've done nothing wrong. Let me rephrase that. I am sorry. I am sorry for these texts and the way they've been used, for the harm and hurt they've caused my family, for the perception of people in the public, and I am sorry and deeply regretful for that. But when it comes, that's a personal acceptance of responsibility that I take and I need and am working to make right. But when it comes to official conduct, when it comes to any action which would violate a law or a crime, absolutely, I've never done that, and I have no need to take the fifth.
And Mr. Strzok, you watched as Director Comey testified a number of times under oath to Congress?
I have.
And to your knowledge, has President Trump, has he raised his right hand and gone under oath just as you and Director Comey have to special counsel or anyone else?
Only time I recall is when he was sworn in as president.
Were you the sole individual who closed the Hillary Clinton investigation?
No.
Were you the sole individual who opened the Russia investigation?
No.
On November 3rd, 2015, did you send an email to Michael Cohen and say that our boy can become president of the United States and we can engineer it? I will get Putin's team to buy in on this. Did you send that email?
No.
Did you set up a meeting on June 9th where the email setting up that meeting was sent to Donald Trump Jr., where Donald Trump Jr. was offered dirt on his father's opponent? Did you set up that June 9th meeting at Trump Tower?
Without stating whether or not that meeting happened, I did not set up a meeting.
Did you reply to the email setting up that meeting when dirt was offered and said, I love it?
I did not.
And in the summer of 2016, were you working as a speechwriter?
No.
So would you have happened to have written the speech for Donald Trump, the candidate, in the summer of 2016, where he told an audience, Russia, if you're listening, and then went on to tell the Russians that if they hacked Hillary Clinton's emails, they'd be rewarded? Did you write that speech?
I did not.
Does any of the behavior that I just described concern you from a counterintelligence perspective?
Tremendously.
Why?
Because it indicates a set of standards and requests that, in my mind, one, encourage a foreign power to begin inserting themselves into our electoral process. It indicate a willingness or a desire to engage in a conversation and dialogue about how to do that. It potentially implicates a variety of laws. And without getting into what has or has not been done investigatively, simply, I'm expressing that based on the open source reporting about those things.
Thank you. Yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, I'm going to go through a few real quick questions, but I think earlier in your testimony today, I want to make sure I have this clear. I think you were quoted as saying, we don't ever talk about ongoing investigations outside of the FBI. Is that true?
I don't know the context in which I said it. I can think of examples.
We were talking about sharing with the media. And
oh, right. No, you
outside.
don't. So, in my experience, that is I can think of examples, not that I've participated in, where members, if there was an ongoing case, say, and a field office wanted to enlist the public's help, and they would talk to the media about getting a lead on a kidnapper. So there are times where that might occur, so that's why I want to be careful to frame what I said and how I said it.
So you have never talked to anyone outside of the FBI about the Russia investigation at all?
I have never spoken to any member of the media about the Russia investigation.
Have you spoken to anyone who is not in the media and is not part of the Department of Justice or the FBI about the Russia investigation,
The U.S.
other than witnesses?
The U.S. intelligence community.
All right, so you've talked to the CIA.
The U.S. intelligence community. I would not limit
would
it
that,
to that. And
would
I'm
that
not gonna-
include the CIA?
Potentially. I don't think I can answer the specifics of who I talked to without getting into
Well, so
classified
I'm
material.
going to ask questions that you can't answer that are not specifics about this investigation. And so in doing so, I need you to give me clear answers. Are you aware that there was a meeting between Director Brennan and Senator Harry Reid where indeed he shared certain intelligence with Senator Reid on August the 25th of 2016? Are you aware of that?
Not to my recollection, I am not.
Okay, well then the text message between you and Miss Page a few days after that on August 30th where you said, here it comes, when Senator Reid sent a letter to Director Comey, what would you have been referring to then?
My recollection of that, which is very imprecise, was that Senator Reid had been making a lot of comment, and I don't know if it was public comment or comment to Director Comey.
Well, they weren't public at that
indication,
time.
sir, if
They
I can
became
answer your
public
question,
with the
you
New
want-
York Times, but they weren't public at that time. So are you aware that in your email dated January 10th, where you acknowledged the fact that Harry Reid knew about the dossier prior to sending that letter, are you aware of that email from you?
I don't know that I was talking in that about the steel material, what you're referring to as the dossier. I would have to check my notes. I'm not.
Well, I need you to check your notes and report back because we have evidence that would suggest that. So since we're talking about
The date on this, sir, was what? August of?
August 25th was the briefing with Harry Reid by
2016?
2016 by Director Brennan. He sends a letter then to Director Comey, which we have acknowledgement of by Director Comey and by you and Lisa Page in text messages that would suggest that you were aware of that. So the CIA director briefing Harry Reid, and the indication is that they talked about the dossier, and we get that indication from an email from you from January 10th.
Yeah, but that's not true. Congressman, the first recollection I have of any material from the material produced by Mr. Steele was mid-September of 2016. So I did not know or have information of that material, certainly from any other source prior to mid-September. If memory serves.
You had not seen it until mid-September.
My recollection is that in mid-September, and again, I have to defer.
But I
my
want
notes,
to
which
give you a
don't have.
chance to make sure that we're clear on the record here. You are not aware of a briefing that took place between Director Brennan and Senator Harry Reid on August 25th.
That is correct, my recollection. I was not aware of that meeting.
All right, so let me go a little bit further because we've got 4 or 5 other documents that would indicate that the White House was notified at least 4 different times about this investigation. Do you think that that would be appropriate during an ongoing campaign that the Obama administration would be kept up to speed on a Russia collusion investigation? Do you think that would be appropriate?
Sir, you're mixing a couple of things. It would be entirely appropriate for the White House to be aware and concerned about what the government of Russia was doing with regard to the elections. When it comes to
that was not my
to
question, but I
if-
agree. I'm concerned. I actually have a bill that I encourage my colleagues opposite to talk about Russian interference where we can make sure that didn't happen. We're talking about an investigation that would include collusion being talked about with the White House. We have evidence that would suggest, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, that it was discussed with people in the Obama administration. Were you aware of any discussion that took place with regards to the Russia collusion investigation that took place with the Obama administration's executive branch?
So when I want to ask you, sir, when you say investigations, are you talking about investigations? I'm not saying there were or were not investigations of U.S. persons or potentially investigations of a Russian sitting in the Ukraine.
Of U.S. persons associating with Donald Trump's campaign.
I am not aware of any briefings to the White House about those. When was the time frame you provided? I'm not aware of any briefings at the
Anytime
White House
between
about-
July 31st and November 8th when the election happened. You're not aware of any. That's your sworn testimony
Am I
here today.
sworn about specific identities of people who were there?
No, I
participated
wasn't
in
asking
none.
about the people. I don't want to know the people.
Right.
I want to know, did it happen? Are you aware of any conversations that happened with Obama administration officials? And be careful how you answer.
I am certainly aware of conversations that occurred with Obama administration officials. I'm aware of a variety of conversations that took place across the U.S. intelligence community talking about the Russian efforts. I am aware that my recollection and understanding, again, I was not present at any briefing, my understanding is that there were not discussions of identities of individual U.S. persons who may or may not have been the subject of investigation.
Okay, I think you're parsing words, but we'll
Oh, sir,
I'll yield back.
You're asking me to parse words.
Time of the
If
gentleman
you want
has
a specific
expired.
answer to be careful, then I would. The only way I can do that is by parsing.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and against the wisdom of my grandmother that said that when you see a circus going on, don't jump in the middle of it and expect people not to call you a clown. I will ask questions anyway because I think that this is a circus. And the problem is that it's a distraction from real issues that we're talking about or should be talking about in this country. We've asked this committee to have a hearing on the fact that we still have not renewed the Voting Rights Act. We have had no hearing. We've asked this committee to have a hearing on DACA, where we are putting at risk dreamers who make this country a better place. But we've had no hearing on DACA. We've asked for hearings on the fact that we are separating infants and toddlers from their parents, with now clearly no ability to reunite the family. So we have sick and maniacal things going on in this country, and we spent 6 hours with 20% of Congress locked in a room bashing someone in hopes that we can discredit a law enforcement investigation. In my wildest dreams, in my entire life, I never thought that I, a young black man, would be defending the FBI. But we were always taught that we have to believe in the system, that the people who take an oath and swear to protect, people who protect and serve our communities, people who have fought for this country on foreign land, that we give them the benefit of the doubt of their honesty and their integrity and the fact that they want to see justice served. We have these hearings, but we won't have hearings to really look at Russian collusion. We can't even get the administration to admit that Russians played a part in hacking our election. So when we look at what we're doing today, what we're doing is wasting precious time. And I can go down the list. On September 7th, September 7th of 2017, we sent a letter about DACA. On October 2nd of 2017, we sent a letter to this committee asking to have a hearing about the Las Vegas shooting and what we could be doing as the Judiciary Committee to make sure that that doesn't happen again. We sent a letter November 6th of 2017 to ask about what we could be doing when 25 people were killed in a church in Texas. We, the Judiciary Committee with jurisdiction, why are we not having a hearing on that? So the question is, with all of the talent on this committee on both sides, my Republican colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, we have spent far too much time today on a red herring that is designed to do exactly what I'm afraid it's doing, which is distracting from the real issues that we're dealing with in this country. And unfortunately, with the media and our 24-hour news cycle, American people are going to hear this over and over and actually think that this is a real substantive hearing when it's not. And I just think it's very unfortunate because people in America have some real problems they're dealing with, how to find their children, how to keep a roof over their head, clothes on their back, food on the table, care for an ailing parent, and we're in here wasting time. And with that, I'll just yield the balance of my time. If there's anything that you think you need to add, or that you were cut off and not had the time to add to this discussion, I'll yield the balance of my time to Mr. Strzok to do that.
Sir, no, I appreciate that offer. Yeah, I'm struck listening to your statements, and I know the history of the FBI. I certainly want the FBI to be something that you immediately leap to the defense of, and I think that's something we're working very hard to become. But yeah, again, I appreciate the offer, and thank you.
And when it comes to the FBI, I also asked years ago to have a hearing on the fact that we don't know or track how many crimes are committed by FBI informants. We haven't had that hearing. But we spent time on Fast and Furious because we were putting guns, introducing guns into the hands of criminals. But every day, the FBI and law enforcement with snitches and confidential informants allow people to deal drugs in the African-American community that cooperate with the FBI. We still have not had that hearing. So all I'm asking for is let's at least keep our eye on things that are affecting all of our communities, and this just isn't one of them. And the unfortunate part is I think, you know, we've been unable to keep tunnel vision on the things that are important, and we've allowed ourselves to get distracted by something that the investigation will, at the end of its day, the thing will speak for itself. And whether there was collusion, whether people broke the law, we will find out. But we do know one thing, that there's been indictments and there have been guilty pleas. And in my experience, guilty people don't plead guilty very often. And when you have indictments that say the United States of America versus
The time
X,
of the
Y,
gentleman
and
has
Z,
expired.
then we know that where there's smoke, there's fire. And we ought to allow the process to play out. With that, I surrender the remainder of my time.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Strzok, I thank you for being here. I know it's been a long day and this is the last place we want to be, but you're the reason we're here, and actions by you are the reason we are here. And I know that my colleague from Pennsylvania, Representative Marino, had shown you this handbook on ethics for on and off-duty conduct issued by the U.S. Department of Justice. Principle 9 of the 14 principles espoused in there say that employees shall protect and conserve federal property and shall not use it for other than authorized activities. And as my colleague on the other side of the aisle from the District of Columbia, Congressman Norton, pointed out, quote, anything that was on your official phone belongs to the public. Would you not agree?
I don't. It is funded by the public. It is in the service of the public. I don't know that it necessarily makes
and it is federal property.
Yes.
And according to Principle 9, shall not be used for anything other than authorized activities. That being said, did you use any other federal property for any other reason for anything but federal activities?
I would tell you FBI policy allows the use of phones for personal de minimis use. And
De
FBI
minimis.
text messages
So would you say we're here on de minimis?
Well, it's one big bucket, sir. FBI agents can send 100 billion texts or one text, and they would get billed the same.
But you've testified today that what you texted was considered political free speech. Your opinions were political free speech. And do you feel that your use of a federally authorized, federally owned cell phone protects your right of exercising your political free speech?
Sir, look, I think
Yes or no?
I think it was bad judgment. I think it was terrible judgment, but I do not. I think it is.
Let's say you took a federal car.
I believe it is protected speech.
As the same way the protected speech would be then if you used your federal vehicle and put a Hillary Clinton bumper sticker on.
No, sir.
Why not? That's protected free speech.
Because if you read the ethics guidelines, sir, that
yes,
is,
sir. Read
that
the ethics
is,
guidelines,
sir,
and that's what I'm doing.
May I answer your question?
Please.
That the use of or display of any bumper sticker, but believe me, after this started, I've gone through the ethics guidelines up, down, left, and right in the Hatch Act. Placing a political bumper sticker on a car on a Bureau government car, any government car, is expressly prohibited. To the contrary, expression, publicly or privately, of personal political belief is encouraged. And I would encourage
you could use it on any federal property,
to read
even
the
when it's
details
violative
of that
principle,
policy
even
guide
when it's
before you
violative
start
of-
quoting
Allow
it
the
out of
witness to
context.
answer the question, Mr. Chairman.
The witness did
witness-
answer the question. The gentleman from Florida controls the time.
The FBI Ethics Integrity Program Policy, FBI Code of Conduct, states that employees shall conduct their personal activities in a manner that does not impede their professional performance or tarnish the reputation of the FBI. You would agree with that?
I do.
And you have blamed today the media, you have blamed the Washington community, you've blamed the president, you've blamed everybody, and you say it's just not you. So my question is, do you believe in any way that your personal texts that were done on federal property have in any way tarnished the reputation of the FBI?
Sir, I don't think I've blamed anybody here at all today.
Have you?
Sir, I take responsibility for sending those texts. Those texts have caused, as I've said now,
I agree with
times
you.
at least,
You said
sir,
that earlier, but
an immense amount of
has
damage
this tarnished the reputation
and have
of the FBI?
hurt the reputation
Has
of
it
the
tarnished
FBI.
the reputation of the FBI?
Yes, sir.
It has, hasn't it?
Yes.
And to take it even further, on page 4 of the Ethics Handbook, it states,
Sir, while you're looking for that reference, I would tell you
The
having
time is
written-
controlled by the gentleman from
the State
Florida.
Department has defined notoriously disgraceful conduct as conduct which, were it to become widely known, would embarrass, discredit, or subject to opprobrium the perpetrator of and the United States. My concern is that we've seen little or no remorse here other than saying, I wish I'd never sent those texts out because it hurt my family. But in fact, as an elected member of Congress, I have an obligation entrusted to me by my people to make sure that we maintain the quality of trust in our government. And after today, after what we've seen today, I understand why the federal government has such a low level of trust from the American people. My question to you is, having been there, having now been here, how do we reinstate that trust to the American people? How do we make sure this never happens again?
Sir, a couple of answers to several things you said. First, I don't think the American people has lost faith and confidence in the FBI at all. What the FBI does day in, day out, you're wrong, sir. I know, I've spoken to agents in 56 field offices, and I know the work they do day in, day out, and whatever is convenient to say here or on some news clip is absolutely not what exists. Second, sir, I would tell you, yes, and I don't know where you're saying I don't have remorse or somehow I'm not sorry. I have said, and I will tell you again, sir.
It's not a
knowing
question of
that I've
bias,
said
it's a
that,
question of
I am
credibility.
sir, if I may respond to your question, I am deeply regretful for those texts. I wrote them. I know it. I know what has been done with them. At the same time, I will tell you, sir,
It has
the
tarnished the
FBI there is an expectation that those texts are private. The Bureau allows me or any FBI employee to text my priest, to text my doctor. In that
Knowing that they're
policy,
gonna be
The
there
time of the
there is a
gentleman has
necessary
expired.
expectation that those are not going to be made public. I had no idea that this was going to happen, and darn, if I knew, I never would have done it for sure.
Thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start by saying this is a stupid and ridiculous hearing for at least 2 reasons. The Judiciary Committee has jurisdiction over immigration. It is July 12, 2018. And as we sit here today, there are nearly 3,000 babies and kids who have been ripped away from their parents by the Trump administration, and we're not doing a hearing on that. We're doing a hearing instead on the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails in 2016. That's just dumb. Second, before this hearing today, my Republican colleagues could not point to a single act that you took, Agent Strzok, in an official capacity that showed bias in any of these official investigations. Now, more than 8 hours later, they still can't point to a single official act you took that showed bias in these investigations. You know, there's a famous book I read called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Based on today's circus, I hope more members on this committee read that book. But there's one thing all of us are taught in kindergarten, which is that actions speak louder than words. Now, your words show that you did not like Donald Trump. You used the F word when referring to Donald Trump. You wanted Donald Trump to lose. And the one thing you could have done to cause him to lose is to disclose the Russia investigation in July of 2016. Did you do that, sir?
I did not.
Did you disclose the investigation in August 2016?
No.
September of 2016?
No.
October of 2016?
No.
November of 2016?
No.
What you did is what we expect every FBI agent to do, which is to check their personal beliefs at the door and do your job, and that's what you did. You also showed by your words that you wanted Hillary Clinton to win. But yet the IG investigation found that you advocated for more aggressive investigative measures into the Clinton investigation, including the use of grand jury subpoenas and search warrants to obtain evidence. Is that true?
Yes.
And again, you did that because you checked your political beliefs at the door, and when you did your duty as an FBI agent, you applied the law to the facts. That's what we expect you to do. That's what we expect prosecutors to do. That's what we expect judges to do. I'm a former prosecutor. There were defendants I despised. There were defendants I sort of was okay with, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was, could we prove a charge beyond a reasonable doubt? If we could, we went forward. If we couldn't, we did not go forward. And that's what we expect everybody to do. Now, there's been some allegations by one of my colleagues today about political donations and how that might show bias. So let's talk about FBI Director Christopher Wray. He is a Republican, nominated by a Republican president, confirmed by a Republican-controlled Senate. I'm going to ask you to accept, for purposes of this question, the following fact, that he gave over $39,000 in political donations exclusively to Republican candidates. I still trust FBI Director Wray to do his job because I expect him to check his personal beliefs at the door and do his job when he's on duty. Do you still trust FBI Director Christopher Wray?
Implicitly, yes.
The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, made political contributions to the Alabama Republican Party. I still trust if there's a case involving a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or someone who voted for Joe Stein, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, could look at the facts in the law and apply it and do it in a fair and unbiased manner. Do you still trust Attorney General Jeff Sessions to do that, even though he made political contributions to the Alabama Republican Party?
I don't know him in nearly the same capacity that I know the director, but he's taken an oath as the Attorney General, and I trust him to discharge that.
Thank you. And then let me conclude by saying this. We're going to know at some point what the Robert Mueller investigation found. We already know about the Hillary Clinton emails because there's been an exhaustive investigation into that, plus this IG report. And what we're seeing now is an attack on law enforcement. When I was prosecuting cases, I know that when defendants don't have the facts or evidence on their side, they resort to attacking law enforcement. That's what we see happening now. And I just thought I'd end on a quote from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who said, basically, when you're attacking the FBI, you're losing. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you have mentioned, I think to my count, over 30 times about your personal beliefs when it comes to your text, and that was just your opinion. One of the texts you said, "We will stop it," referencing the Trump campaign. Mr. Strzok, that's not a personal belief text. That's a plan of action. Who's the we in that text?
Sir, I disagree. That's not a plan of action. The we, as I have stated, and the reason I'm stating it so many times is I've been asked at least twice as many times. The reason I said that, I don't recall that text. When I look at the context of it, in the middle of the night, I can tell you I am certain it is not.
Okay, well,
a suggestion that me or the FBI take any action, or that I can also, sir, assure you.
If I could reclaim my time, you answer the question that you don't recall it, but
under oath, there was no plan of action.
Yes, well, my 8th grade teacher, English teacher, Mrs. Painter, used to teach me that stop was an action verb, so I believe it certainly sounds that. Let me get away from just the content of the text, as despicable as they were. Let's talk about the volume of text, if we could, please. 50,000 texts over this time frame. Is that the number that you understand?
That is a number I've heard from the agency.
Several hundred pages, 10 to 12, 400 pages, 10 to 12, about 50,000 texts, which is amazing. I'm hoping you at the agency at least had the unlimited data plan, since it was a taxpayer's phone, because of the great amount of volume. And you even testified today under oath there's many more on your personal phone, which blows me away. Sometimes over 100 texts a day while you're supposed to be doing your job. In fact, on Friday, June the 10th, 2016, there were 73 exchanged texts. This is the same day that the FBI finally made a deal for Clinton's attorneys and laptops. Did you leave your desk to send these 73-plus texts on that single day?
I do not recall where I was when I sent those texts.
Well, I'm sure that you were spending a good bit of time during the day.
If you look at those texts, the huge majority of them are in fact related to work minutia and administrative things.
Well, there may be a lot, but there's a whole lot more. Plus, I don't get to text with my friends and family sometimes till we finish our work in the day. Obviously, you had enough time during the day, being the second lead investigator, that you're supposed to be doing your work. But here we find a lot of time, 50,000 texts.
Sir, of which the bulk of the work, of which the bulk.
James Comey has talked about how the mid-year investigative team was the A-team, spending every waking moment to complete the investigation. How does this statement square with the amount of time you seem to spend texting Lisa Page on working days?
Sir, the majority of those texts, the grand majority, were work-related matters. Of the many, many things I've been accused of, some of which are true and horrible, one of them is not being lazy. So I can assure you that those texts and what they represent is work, and work that was going on frequently from 5 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. So I would encourage you, sir, if you want to read through the 50,000 and have somebody catalog what
that's
kind of
astronomically high. You're talking 600 to 700 per week. So don't give me that this was all work-related text unless you have the world's fastest thumbs. The other point I want to make here is that this is an integrity issue. And that's part of the problem here. We talked about the text, and no, you're right. They weren't all on official time, like making fun of the Trump people at the Walmart. You're right. Some of those were in your spare time. But I believe there is a credibility issue, and that's probably one of the reasons that Mr. Mueller decided to take you off this particular case. I believe you cannot sit there and tell us, as you testified earlier today, you didn't know for sure why he did, but I believe it's pretty obvious to the American people that you have so discredited the FBI that you were removed from this case. With that, I'll yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
May I respond to the Congressman?
The time is controlled by the gentleman from Ohio.
We allow the gentleman to answer the question.
At the conclusion of his time, the gentleman will be allowed to briefly answer anything that was left unanswered by Mr. Walker. But Mr. Jordan now controls the time.
Agent Strzok, I just want to go back to where we were right before the votes that we had to leave the committee. You said, when I was asking you about documents received by the FBI from Mr. Orr, you said you did not personally receive documents from Mr. Orr, but the FBI did. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you also said the FBI got documents from a different source in mid-September. Different source than whom?
Different source from Mr. Orr. It was not Mr. Orr who provided the initial documents that I became aware of in mid-September.
So Mr. Orr did not hand you the dossier?
Mr. Orr didn't hand me anything. Mr.
FBI.
Orr provided information to the FBI that included material that is what everybody's calling the dossier. Reporting from Mr. Steele.
Say that again. Say that sentence again. Mr. Orr provided what?
He provided some elements of reporting that my understanding is originated from Mr. Steele.
So Bruce Orr did give the FBI information relative to the dossier?
Yes.
And another source also in mid-September gave you personally information?
No.
You, the FBI, information relative to the dossier?
I never personally received dossier information.
I got that.
The FBI in mid-September, the first time I am aware of the FBI having that information, the first time I saw it was in mid-September. My understanding was that came into the FBI. That's when I became aware of it and when I first read it.
One more time. Just say it. Bruce Orr gave the FBI documents relating to and supporting or part of the dossier. Is that accurate?
Mr. Orr gave the FBI documents which included material that I believe originated from Mr. Steele.
Damn.
Thank you.
The gentleman may briefly answer the question that the gentleman felt he didn't have an opportunity to answer with Mr. Walker.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I wanted to address, when you bring up an integrity issue, and it's interesting, you and the gentleman from Texas raised this in a way that almost, approaches, it is insulting.
The gentleman may answer that question.
If you're going to make an accusation,
so what I'm going to respond to is what
here.
I'm saying. I am here under oath. I am not lying. I have never lied under oath, and I never will. And so the insinuation, not even the insinuation, the direct comment that you somehow say you have an integrity issue is insulting. I take offense. It is incorrect. Nothing I have
never
said here
mentioned
today.
your personal life. I just simply said the amount of time that you were spending on the taxpayer's dollar, wasting it when you were supposed to be doing your job, texting back and forth to the court, is a problem.
And sir, what I'm saying is,
and the gentleman has already answered that question. So now the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is recognized for 5 minutes.
So we have more than 2,500 kids in America who are separated from their families, no hearings from judiciary or oversight. We got thousands of people who've been slain in gun violence from Parkland to Las Vegas to San Bernardino County, no hearings. on the universal background check favored by 97% of the people. The president has plunged us into trade wars. He's insulting and taunting our democratic allies around the world. He's flattering autocrats and kleptocrats and dictators around the world, and he's done nothing to stop another round of cyber sabotage of our elections coming in 2018. But our colleagues don't want to do any hearings on any of the chaos that's been set loose in the land. No, Mr. Strzok, the GOP wants to talk about your personal texts, 2 or 3 out of more than 50,000 that we've seen. And the purpose, of course, is to derail and discredit the investigation by the special counsel that has obtained 19 indictments and 5 criminal convictions of people like Flynn and Gates and Papadopoulos and so on. And when their names come up, you'll notice that our colleagues maintain a discreet and demure silence on the other side of the aisle. But they're outspoken about this. They say, Mr. Strzok, that you are at the heart of a deep state conspiracy to oppose Donald Trump. To make this claim, they've got to ignore the fact that you were an equal opportunity insulter of politicians. You had choice negative words for Democrats and independents, like Bernie Sanders, who you called an idiot, like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton and Martin O'Malley, who you called a freak show. That's not very nice, but hey, there's a First Amendment here in America, and you can still insult government officials without being thrown into jail or held in contempt of Congress, at least by our side of the aisle. There are no kings here, and we have freedom of speech, the right that is cherished by the people and feared only by tyrants. But my colleagues have insisted on making a conspiracy theory out of your pillow talk texts. But there are a couple of facts they can't get around. Number one, the IG found no partisan bias affecting the official investigation. Number two, Attorney General Sessions is a Republican appointed by Donald Trump. Rod Rosenstein is a Republican appointed by Donald Trump. James Comey is a Republican appointed by Donald Trump. FBI Director Wray is a Republican appointed by Donald Trump. And Robert Mueller is a lifelong Republican. So this would have to be a Republican conspiracy. So I'm looking for evidence of the Republican conspiracy, and all I could find were the kind of statements that you've been arraigned on today. So I want to ask you about those statements. In the spring of 2016, Senator Ted Cruz called Donald Trump a, quote, sniveling coward, a pathological liar, and a serial philanderer. Was this attack on Trump by Senator Ted Cruz a coordinated part of a deep state conspiracy that you organized?
No.
On August 8th, 2016, Senator Marco Rubio said Donald Trump was, quote, unworthy of being our president. Was this attack part of a deep state conspiracy that you organized?
No.
In October of 2016, Speaker Paul Ryan said, I am not going to defend Donald Trump, not now, not in the future. Was this fleeting outburst of moral courage part of a deep state conspiracy that you organized?
No.
Former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called Donald Trump a moron. Former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt said he's an empty vessel when it comes to the Constitution. Steve Bannon said he's like an 11-year-old child. General H.R. McMaster referred to Donald Trump reportedly as a dope and an idiot with the intelligence of a kindergartner. Karl Rove called him a complete idiot. Representative Duncan Hunter said he's an a-hole, but he's our a-hole. And the director of the National Economic Council, Gary Cohn, reportedly sent out an email describing Trump as an idiot surrounded by clowns. Were all of these vituperative, negative characterizations of Donald Trump part of a deep state GOP conspiracy engineered by you and your friends?
No.
Were any of these statements part of a conspiracy you organized?
No.
Now, although this conspiracy does appear to be overwhelmingly Republican, if it exists, balance compels me to ask you about my hero, Bruce Springsteen. Unlike the others who are all Republicans, Springsteen's a Democrat, and he said, the Republic is under siege by a moron. Did you tell him to say that?
No.
Was it part of a deep state conspiracy to criticize the president?
No.
Mr. Strzok, this hearing has been a circus and a kangaroo court run in banana Republican fashion. And I believe that some of my colleagues have disgraced themselves today in their attack on the FBI and the justice system of America. How can we recover from the hole that has been dug here today?
Sir, America is strong. I have, however bad I think I've seen it in my life, I am confident that the institutions, the American people, will endure and be great. I have full faith in the United States, all the men and women, and even in times of trial and tribulation, I have every confidence that we will emerge as great as we've ever been. And that will.
Well, I'm with you, and thank you for your service to America.
Yes, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've said repeatedly today that you were not biased, but Bob Mueller kicked you off his team as a consequence of your bias, didn't he?
Sir, I wouldn't agree with that characterization. I think I answered earlier. My understanding was that, and again, there were no words spoken about this, but it was the potential appearance that he wanted to avoid as much as anything else.
So did Bob Mueller say, I'm not firing you from this team from your bias, I'm getting rid of you? So what is your basis for the belief that it's the appearance of your bias rather than your actual bias that resulted in Mueller removing you?
Because I think his experience both with me, my work, and the reputation of others about me and my work, that
so what
he knows
said here,
that I am an individual who follows the facts where they lay.
So your testimony today that you were removed not for bias but for the appearance of bias is based on your perception of Robert Mueller's perception of you?
No, sir. I'm saying what I would think the logical case. If you want to know what his reasons were, you'd need to ask him.
Let me ask it simply, Mr. Strzok. Did Robert Mueller ever ask you if you were biased against Donald Trump?
He did not.
So he didn't ask you when he hired you?
No, that question is not typically a question that gets asked during hiring meetings in the U.S. government, to my experience.
One would seemingly think that if you were hiring someone to investigate something, you might ask. But certainly then, when you were removed, was it clear to you that Mr. Mueller was aware of these incendiary text messages?
Yes.
So he knew of the text messages, but never asked you whether you were biased or not?
That's correct.
Your girlfriend texted you on the 8th of August, Trump's not ever going to be president, right? Right? Do you recall your reply?
I do recall my reply, and if I hadn't, it's been refreshed in my recollection no less than 4 or 5 times today, sir. But yes, I do recall my reply.
And what was it?
I'm sure you have it. I don't want to misstate it, but essentially, no, he's not. We'll stop it.
Did Bob Mueller ever ask you about that text message?
He did not.
About a week later, on August 15th, you sent a text message regarding a meeting in Andy McCabe's office. Is that right?
I don't know the date. I do believe I know the text message that you're going to.
Did Bob Mueller ever ask you what happened in the meeting in Andrew McCabe's office?
There are many meetings that I attended in, not many, but
did
several
Bob Mueller
meetings
ask you about any of them?
He did not.
Huh. Did Bob Mueller ask you what you meant by an insurance policy?
Director Mueller did not.
On the 26th of July, this is contemporaneous with the opening of the Trump-Russia investigation, your girlfriend texts you, Clinton just has to win now. And you reply a few days later, and damn, this feels momentous because this matters. The other one did too, but that was to ensure we didn't F something up. This matters because this matters. So super glad to be on this voyage with you. Did Bob Mueller ask you why this matters?
If you're asking why it mattered, it was
a
comparison between a case about...
I've seen you do this where you answer questions that are not asked, but that is not what I'm asking you. I want to know if Bob Mueller asked you about this text message.
Director Mueller did not ask me about any text message, Congressman.
Well, gosh, just days after Mueller is appointed, in 2 text messages, one on the 19th of May and one on the 22nd of May, you reference impeachment. Did Bob Mueller ask you why you were referencing impeachment?
Congressman, as I just stated, Director Mueller did not ask me about any text message.
Well, I find that very interesting, that Bob Mueller has to remove you as a consequence of bias. Now, you don't say it's bias. You say that based on your perception of Bob Mueller's perception of you, it couldn't possibly be your bias. It has to be the appearance of bias. But when we get into actually the manifestation of that bias through your words, Bob Mueller doesn't ask you about a single one of them. And so then I look at other people that Bob Mueller picked on his team, people like Lisa Page. I'm very curious to know whether or not he asked her about any of her incendiary text messages. I mean, but throughout the team, you've got people working for Bob Mueller who have active connections to Hillary Clinton. You know, Greg Anders donated to the Clinton campaign. Kyle Freeney donated to the Clinton campaign. Andrew Goldstein donated to the Clinton campaign. Elizabeth Prigolar donated to the Clinton campaign. James Quarles donated to the Clinton campaign. Jeannie Rhee represented Ben Rhodes during the Benghazi investigation. She represented the Clinton Foundation against Freedom of Information Act requests. Andrew Weissman The number 2 for Mueller attended Hillary Clinton's election night party. Aaron Zellaby represented Justin Cooper, who was the person who set up Hillary Clinton's private email server. And then there's you and Miss Page. And it's just really interesting to me that when you were so damaging to the investigation that you had to go, that Bob Mueller, the person who brought in all these people that had connections to the Hillary Clinton campaign, did not ask you about a single text message. And I tend to believe, Mr. Chairman, that it's because he did not want to know the answer and that there was bias and that your perception of Bob Mueller's perception of you is totally unreliable, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, let me just clear this up right now. I am not angry, and I'm not desperate, and I'm not afraid of the truth, but I am in pursuit of it. First of all, I want to thank you for your service to our country through the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and for your service to our country through the United States Army. Mr. Chairman, each of us as members of Congress took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. My oath as a member of Congress was not the first oath that I took, it was the third oath, for I served as a law enforcement officer for 27 years. And like the employees of the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the Department of Justice, I swore to protect this country and to remember, uphold the rule of law. We have now wasted countless hours of our very limited and precious time chasing these phantoms, wasting both the witnesses' time and our own. The Inspector General's report must have been a very big disappointment to the President and to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Let me say this, law enforcement officers, and you said it earlier, Mr. Strzok, not only do they have political opinions, but they are encouraged to have them. And as a chief of police, I encourage them to have them and express them. Perhaps, but their expression never interfere with their ability to conduct their job. Perhaps Congress could learn something from members of the law enforcement community, because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle allow political bias to influence their judgment every day. And perhaps they should read, and all members of Congress should read, the Ethics Manual for Congress. The IG report said, and I quote, "We found no evidence that the conclusions by department prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations," unquote. President Trump's and his enablers' conspiracy theory about the Department of Justice and the FBI have been investigated, and after hours today, they have still been debunked. The president's own campaign manager is currently sitting in jail, awaiting trial on multiple charges, and there is enough evidence, as we've already seen, that resulted in 5 guilty pleas. The truth hurts, but no matter how you hate it, and no matter how much it hurts, it's not going away. That's the real story here. And we need to keep our eyes on the ball and not chase ghosts through the halls of the Department of Justice while letting the important work of both of these committees go undone. But since we're here, Mr. Strzok, I want to get your reaction to the president's tweet on December 3rd of 2017. After years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worse than history. There he goes. It's always the biggest, always the worst. But fear not, we will bring it back. Mr. Strzok, do you agree that the FBI's reputation is in tatters and is the worst in history?
Not at all.
Do you agree with the characterization that the Clinton investigation was phony and dishonest?
No.
Were you the sole decision maker on this case?
No.
In your opinion, what kind of impact do statements like this, because I do care about how it affects the law enforcement community. Apparently, my friends on the other side of the aisle, I never thought as a law enforcement officer I'd ever have to defend the Department of Justice from my Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle. What kind of effect do statements like this have on the morale, on the good men and women who do a tough job every day?
Congresswoman, I think they have a significant impact on the morale of the men and women of the FBI. I would tell you that regardless of what is going on swirling around them, that my experience, the agents and analysts and others that I work with are focused on their job and their mission. So there's a lot swirling around, and agents tune that out and focus and do their job. But inevitably, the kind of perception and the things that are being said are heard and are damaging because people know they're simply not true. So they're not helpful, but I have every faith and confidence in the FBI, in the agents of the FBI, and in what we do every single day.
Thank you so much.
I
know. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss a little bit the Wiener laptop discovery. You have explained there was a significant delay from the time that information was discovered, in which obviously hundreds of thousands, by your own words, hundreds of thousands of emails were discovered, potentially pertinent to the Hillary Clinton email investigation. There was a delay there, and you have explained in the past that the delay was caused simply because you were too busy. What were you doing during October of 2016 that caused you to be so busy?
Sir, I wouldn't call it a significant delay. I don't think it was caused because I was too busy. The answer to your question, in the fall of 2016, I was the Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division. I had responsibility over...
You've explained that you were
global,
too
sir,
busy.
yes, but
what were you
I was
busy
trying
doing?
to explain what I was doing. I was busy overseeing thousands of cases, every espionage case in the FBI, every economic espionage case in the FBI, every case having to do with the counter... Sir, you asked the question, may I answer?
Well, and I'm going to reclaim my time. Were you involved in the Russian investigation that time as well?
That was, aspects of that were one of the many things that were under my supervision.
So you were involved with it. Inspector General Horowitz expressed concern that so many individuals from the Clinton investigation mid-year team were assigned to the Russian investigation, people like you. Who made that decision for people from the mid-year team to go to the Russian investigation?
Sir, I was Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division. I'm the number 2. If there's something large going on in CI, chances are I'm going to have a role in it. So it isn't an agent on the street working the case, but the decision to assign me was certainly made absolutely by my boss, the assistant director, and probably above him, the EAD.
How many other people went to the Russian case?
Sir, I can't get into those specific numbers. I can tell you of the senior managers, several of the senior managers were involved, but this is one of the points I disagree with the Inspector General is he doesn't appreciate the staffing in the context of the level of the people that were involved in those cases. Did anyone in the FBI
or the DOJ question the overlap of personnel between the two cases?
Not that I'm aware of.
So no one questioned it. At the end of October, you were finally brought to the point to pursue the laptop information and to make it public days before the election. Did your involvement at that time with the Russian election interference cease when the Clinton email case was reopened?
No.
Okay. So you continued working on the Russian case while also leading the reopened Hillary Clinton case.
A colleague of mine, a co-lead, and I were bringing the team back together. Again,
well, just a month before.
Sir, if I may, because it's important, I think people have a misunderstanding. At that time, I'm a deputy assistant director.
All right,
when you talk about the case, you have multiple, yes, sir, you have multiple layers of people, though, below that are doing that work.
I understand that, but a month before, you told the IG that your Russia workload prevented you from addressing the issue on the laptop discovery, and now all of a sudden you have time for both, according to the IG report.
That's not what I said, and that's not what this report says.
So days before the election, you're investigating 2 key investigations, and a time lapse of nearly a month goes by where there are hundreds of thousands of emails directly related to the email of Hillary Clinton and her campaign, ignored until days before the election, and only when the New York group demands. Well, let me ask you this. Were any of your superiors concerned of the overlap? That the time was, water was going under the bridge?
No. My recollection is that all of us were concerned about the volume of material that we had on our
Andrew
plate from a
McCabe
national
said that he was
security
surprised that you had not reviewed the laptop before October 30th.
His
James
statement said
Baker,
that's
General
inaccurate.
Counsel,
You're misrepresenting what's said. You are misrepresenting
sir,
what's
this is in
stated.
the IG report.
You're misrepresenting what's stated in the IG report.
I'm using the IG report. McCabe said he was surprised that you had not reviewed the laptop information. James Baker, General Counsel, said it was his understanding that that information was being handled. James Comey felt that the entire credibility of the Bureau rested on that case. And what gets me, how is it possible that you could handle both of these cases, perhaps 2 of the most important cases in the history of this country, at least in recent history? How, in the name of justice, does the FBI allow someone so biased as yourself to lead these 2 investigations at the same time, where both end up being compromised, both tainted, justice apparently not happening in either case? You deliberately, from all appearance, delayed the checking into the Hillary Clinton emails on the Wiener laptop until after the election or as close thereof, and it's just corruption through and through. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly, since it wasn't posed to you as a question.
Sir, briefly, nothing was compromised in those investigations. There were a team of folks above and below me that were involved. I was the number 2 in the counterintelligence division. If it was important, I had a role in the oversight of that. There were people below me, senior executive service members, unit chiefs, supervisory agents, in the field office, ASAC, supervisors, case agents, all who were working on this. To the aspect, and there are many things you said about the IG's report that were, if not, there were absolutely misrepresentations. The response and the facts, if you look at them in the report, is that within hours of hearing from New York that there was potential material that was relevant, I had assigned subordinates, supervisors, attorneys, and others to look into it, which they in turn did within hours. As a result, less than a day after finding out about it, I had set into motion a team who had nothing to do with the Russian investigations to pursue that information. They came back and said, New York's still working on it, and my assumption from there was that they, having been assigned that task,
it's
would
your
continue
representation of the IG report that's inaccurate.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Strzok, are you familiar with the FBI Domestic Investigation and Operations Guide, known as the DIOG?
The DIOG, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, this is a policy manual that sets forth the rules you are to follow in deciding to pursue an investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you agree that the DIOG guidelines applied to your investigation of President Trump and the 2016 election, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the DIOG policy 8.1 requires that all FBI employees shall comply with policies, quote, isn't that correct?
Sir, I believe that's absolutely true. I don't know the site.
But you're aware of that?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, you no doubt are aware the DOJ also issues investigation guidance instructions, correct?
Yes.
Now, specifically, DOJ guidance dated March 9th, 2012, states that federal, quote, employees are entrusted with the authority to enforce the laws of the United States and with responsibility to do so in a neutral and impartial manner. This is particularly important in an election year, end of quote. Are you aware of this guidance?
I am not, but I believe it and adhere to it, yes.
So I just want to make sure, because this is really important, because Attorney General Holder issued these instructions to all federal law enforcement agencies to conduct their investigations in a neutral and impartial manner, particularly in an election year. So once again, you're kind of familiar.
Sir, I don't recall that specific instruction. I focus on FBI policy, but that That direction from the department, if it's in force, I readily accept, and I can't.
So you understand why federal employees are supposed to be politically neutral?
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. Everything he says went on this, and your anti-Trump text statements are not politically neutral, correct?
I believe from the perspective of investigating in a politically neutral way, I did that every single day of
Once again,
my job.
your text statements are not politically neutral.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And your investigation activities were, in fact, taking place in an election year, correct?
Yes.
You, in fact, stated that you intended to, quote, stop Trump from becoming president in a clear violation of the FBI, DIOG, and DOJ guidance. Wouldn't that be correct?
That's absolutely incorrect, sir.
No, that wouldn't, because that shows a strict bias.
Sir, I
and it's
completely
politically
disagree.
charged. Well, let me give you a little better situation. Then President or candidate Trump made some comments on the travel ban, did he not?
I recall a variety of comments.
Oh, you got a good memory. And it was used on against him by all the lower courts, wasn't it?
Sir, that is not my area of expertise.
You know, you're very well. You understand this very well, sir. So it was used against him and upheld in all the lower courts until the Supreme Court. And guess what? Why is it different for him than you?
Sir,
there's no difference here. There's no difference because it's
sir,
hearsay.
I would argue.
The difference between him and you is you put it in black and white.
Sir, the difference between me and him, and again, I'm not an attorney. You have somebody who's making
He's not an attorney either.
Based on protected class in terms of the passage of a federal law, which is wildly, demonstrably different from an individual who's expressing a personal political belief. It is stunning that that difference would
Once
not
again,
be
a political
apparent
belief,
to any outside observer.
You used your political belief in black and white in a text message. We've established that in my previous question running up to it. Okay? I got just very little time here. So you said about a bias. This morning I watched, by the way, I'm a dentist. Okay, so I read body language very, very well. And I watched your comment and actions with Mr. Gowdy. You got very angry in regards to the Gold Star father. That shows me that it's innately a part of you and a bias.
Sir, I disagree. I don't know if you're saying this experience is like being at the dentist, if that's what you're suggesting.
Okay, so let me
but I would tell you, sir, what you see in my response, is a genuine passion for the United States of America. What you see is a passion as a patriot. What you see is a genuine anger at people.
I got two more
turning that
questions.
upside
Gentlemen,
I got two more
Arizona controls the time.
I got two more questions for you. If you're in a jury box and somebody sees these text messages, you're removed from the jury box, are you not?
Sir, I can't
you
speculate whether
By the way,
that would
you
happen.
By the way, you are. And the last comment. This morning, you are a smart individual. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. That is why we have two ways, both from a democracy voting and then from the where we have the Electoral College. So make sure that we get
the time
that
of the
straight.
gentleman has expired.
Regular order.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you've taken great offense today at questions about your credibility, but for many of us, that's the real issue here, and I think it is for the American people. As we've been sitting here all day, I've been getting text messages from constituents back home, and they're very concerned about this. This whole thing has been described as shameful and a train wreck, and it feels that way to many of us. I'm playing cleanup here. Many of us will here at the end. Let me ask you a smattering of questions. Number one, here's what you and Ms. Page exchanged the night that Donald Trump secured the Republican nomination in late 2016. You wrote, or she wrote to you, holy blank, Cruz just dropped out of the race. It's going to be a Clinton-Trump race. Unbelievable. You responded, what? She writes back, you heard right, my friend. Now you said, Now the pressure really starts to finish MYE, which we know now is the FBI code name for the Clinton email investigation. And she writes back and responds, it sure does. So here's our problem. You two are the most influential FBI personnel on the Clinton investigation, and within hours of Donald Trump securing the Republican nomination, you text to her, okay, now the pressure really begins. Now we really have to finish the Clinton investigation. And she agrees, and she says it sure does. Here's the question. Why did you have to finish it up so fast? What were you all referring to? Why? Was it to stop President Trump?
Not at all. She was not one of the two most influential people in the investigation. The purpose of that text was not at all having anything to do with candidate Trump or candidate Clinton. That had everything to do with Director Comey's sense and urgency to try and resolve the investigation as soon as we could to get the FBI and the investigation out of the presidential race.
Were you slow walking it prior to that time? Were you slow walking it prior to that time?
Absolutely not. But there was a constant sense of urgency, and I think everybody on the team, everybody in the senior executive management of the FBI understood that the closer and closer and the longer the investigation took, that we continued, thanks to the actions of some, including some of the candidates, to be inserted into as an issue in the presidential campaign.
Let me stop because this is my time. We're not supposed to associate this in any way with all of your many other volumes of text, all the negative, all the disparaging things you said about Donald Trump as a candidate, and the fact that you said, we'll stop it. So those two things are not related in any way at all, right?
Congressman, I understand your concern, and those are your constituents. What I'm telling you under oath is that that expression was what I just told you. It was a desire from the highest levels of the Bureau throughout the team to get us out of the process of the general election.
Okay, let me move on. Did you ever find, personally, did you ever find evidence of collusion or conspiracy, as you've said today, between then candidate Trump and Russia?
Sir, I can't, based on the direction of the FBI, I cannot comment on ongoing investigations.
You said in your text of May 18th, 2017, you concluded, quote, there is no there. What were you referring to?
Sir, I said part of my concern is there might not be a there. And as I mentioned earlier, I think is certainly at the beginning, as we looked at the allegations, there were a wide range of potential things that were going on. On one end, it was that there was nothing, that there was no illegal activity, there was absolutely no conspiracy to do anything, moving up to potentially individuals doing things that are illegally based on individual agendas, and on the very far end, some of the things that might be in the worst case, things which might lead to impeachment. But I was approaching that with a very open mind, not knowing where the facts lay or where they might lead, and some of that saying, hey, there is a reasonable chance, there is a reasonable, realistic set of things which might indicate there's nothing going on here.
Okay, look, you said several times today that every American has a political bias, but not every American has your level of responsibility, the duty, the extraordinary level of responsibility that you had on behalf of the American people. And our entire system of justice depends upon equal and impartial justice under the law. Don't you agree with that?
I absolutely agree on that.
Look, you've spoken in lofty terms today about ethics and honesty and integrity, and yet by every objective measure, the public record of your actions belie those virtues. And look, the Inspector General's report concluded that your conduct demonstrated, quote, extremely poor judgment and a gross lack of professionalism. Why should this committee, why should my constituents back home, why should the American people trust you as a credible witness?
Sir, I regret and I'm sorry for the way that those texts have cast my actions into question and those of the FBI and the investigations. What I'm telling you and what I'd ask you to relay to your constituents is to look at the facts. Set aside the texts. Look at what the IG found. Look at the actions that I took, the actions that the team.
With all due respect, I'm out of time. Hold on. With all due respect, we cannot separate the texts from that question because the texts were written during the investigation while you were in charge of these investigations, while you're the most responsible, important person in these investigations at many times, and we cannot separate your personal views and bias from the facts as they developed. That's our problem, and at the end of the day, that's what we're all still very concerned about, even after all these hours of hearings.
Sir, what I would tell you, sir, is look at the...
The time of the gentleman has expired. That was a statement, not a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you stated today, quote, I do not think that bias was expressed in those text messages, end quote. Inspector General Horowitz stated in his report that those derogatory texts were, quote, not only indicative of a biased state of mind, end quote, but were also, quote, antithetical to the core values of the FBI and the Department of Justice, end quote. He stated further that such actions implicated, quote, provisions in the FBI's offensive code and penalty guidelines, end quote, and referred information to the FBI for adjudication, which is still outstanding. You stated today, quote, at no time did personal beliefs enter into decisions I made, end quote. Yet Mr. Horowitz's report stated, quote, in assessing Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russian investigation over following up on the mid-year related investigative lead discovered on the Wiener laptop in October 2016, these text messages led us to conclude that we did not have confidence that Strzok's decision was free from bias, end quote. You stated today that culture, training, and policy prevent bias in the FBI. They would be noted and stopped. The Justice Department ethical guidelines state the following, quote, superiors may never send to subordinate employees an email directed at the success or failure of a political party, partisan political group, or partisan candidate, end quote. Another one, quote, express opinions about the candidates and issues if the expression is political activity directed at the success or failure of a political party, candidate, or partisan political office or partisan political group. The expression is not permitted while the employee is on duty, end quote. The FBI Domestic Investigations and Operation Guide in section 3.1, because we've heard so much about the adherence of policies and what these things do, that's why it's important to quote them, and I quote in section 3.1, we who enforce the law must not merely obey it, this is the FBI guideline, we have an obligation to set a moral example that those whom we protect can follow. Because the FBI's success in accomplishing its mission is directly related to the support and cooperation of those we protect, these core values are the fiber that holds together the vitality of our institution, end quote. Mr. Strzok, given the extramarital relationship and types of derogatory communication officially exchanged with FBI counsel Lisa Page as laid out in the IG report, did these actions exhibit a, quote, moral example that those whom the FBI protects can follow, end quote?
Sir, thanks for your question. I noticed your CIB, and I want to thank you for your service.
I've had decades of it myself.
Yes, sir. I would tell you, I am not proud. I am ashamed.
Did the policies guide your behavior for these actions?
Sir, for the bulk of my professional actions, every day of my life, they did.
But
for
you
every
stated that these
decision,
actions
I did.
Had no bias, and yet we heard from Mr. Horowitz's IG report that they concluded that there was. And now we see an extramarital relationship and types of derogatory communications officially exchanged. That does not appear to exhibit the actions that would exhibit a moral example for those whom the FBI protects. Do you believe it does?
Sir, I would respond
yes
this
or no?
way. I disagree profoundly with the Inspector
with the
General's
FBI guidelines.
Bias.
Okay, thank
I
you
believe
for that. In section 3.1.1, and I quote, in general, the FBI requires employees to report known or suspected failures to adhere to the law, rules, or regulations by themselves or other employees to any supervisor in the employee's chain of command, end quote. You knew your conduct was wrong, not only in the use of texts, the forwarding of political emails, the forwarding of links, all of that is laid out in the guidelines.
None of that is wrong, sir.
None of that is wrong. And also that the extramarital relationship could place you outside of what would be proper for an FBI agent. So my question is, did you make any attempt to report your conduct to the chain of command?
Sir,
yes or
my
no?
conduct in the context
Did you
of the
make any
FBI
attempt to
guidelines
report
was
your
not
conduct to the
improper.
chain of command?
My conduct of the investigations was always and
we can see
proper,
what that was. Okay,
correct,
thank you. Reclaiming my
guided by
time, and Mr. Chairman, my closing remarks I address to you. I don't have any further comment that I need or any other questions to be answered. FBI agents are required to adhere to strict standards of conduct and exemplify the FBI's core competencies, including communication, respect, leadership, and compassion, problem solving, judgment. The IG found that the use of official devices to send messages intermixing work-related discussions and political commentary demonstrated extremely poor judgment and gross lack of professionalism. The powers of government are drawn from the people's consent. The executive branch draws its law enforcement powers not only from that consent, but most importantly from the trust to wield such power without prejudice and with integrity. Mr. Chairman, we've heard a lot about ethics, patriotism, and service today. We are all accountable for our actions. I am mindful of the words of Christ in Luke, "You shall know a tree by its fruit. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And I yield back my time to you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. And the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you've worked as a criminal investigator for at least 20 years, isn't that right?
National security investigator, primarily CI work, which within the Bureau we differentiate criminal, which is...
But you're familiar with criminal investigations,
yes, sir.
Correct? And you understand that as you're aggregating evidence, you're looking for a couple areas. Number one, you're looking to see if there's an act, the actus reus of a crime, right?
Yes.
You're also looking for culpable mental state of a crime, right?
Yes.
You have to demonstrate the culpable mental state if you're going to bring a case forward, right? Intentional, knowingly, reckless, et cetera, right?
Almost always, yes.
Yeah, unless there's some kind of strict liability, right? And you'd agree that short of some statement against interest, most of the time, the culpable mental state of either intentional or knowingly, that's usually done through circumstantial evidence, correct?
I hesitate to generalize. I would.
Trust me,
I don't
it
know
is.
that I can answer
Trust
that
me, it
question,
is.
sir.
It is, because short of someone making a statement against interest, you've got to prove that they intended not only every element of the offense, right, or knowingly did that offense. That has to be proved, and oftentimes it's by circumstantial evidence, which, by the way, there's a jury instruction typically that goes forward that says there's no qualitative difference between circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. You'd agree with that statement, right?
So I'm not an attorney. I would.
Well, you've been in the court many times, right?
Well,
you sure sound like an attorney sometimes,
very
right?
educated recitations of legal terms that I don't have the education to be able to respond to.
Okay, well, trust me on that.
Sure,
There's a jury instruction that says...
If you're representing to me
Yeah,
that's accurate, I will
right.
accept that.
Right, and then this morning, you said, and then this has been a theme, and I don't know how many umpteen times you said it, but I wrote down the one quote you gave to Chairman Goodlatte. You said, quote, "My text messages are not indicative of bias," close quote. Do you still hold to that position?
I do.
Okay. Now, as we go forward here, when the FBI is trying to put together circumstantial evidence of a culpable mental state, they're looking at things such as text messages. They're looking at things such as communications between people for whatever reason, right? You'd agree with that?
I would.
Yeah. And so that indicates someone's mental state that you're going to take before a jury where you're going to say, beyond a reasonable doubt, we can demonstrate either intentional or knowing by this series, this accumulation of circumstantial evidence, right?
Rephrase the question, please, sir. I'm not...
Okay, this is not hard. So when you're trying to prove a culpable mental state,
Yes.
most of it's coming from circumstantial evidence, very rarely, unless you've got a confession, right?
Yes.
And so you're taking accumulation of various pieces of evidence and you're saying,
Yes.
look, this adds up to intentional or knowingly, right?
Agreed.
So one of the things that's been made evident here is that your statements and your communications with Ms. Page, it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't two. It wasn't three. This is a whole series. It's a whole series that goes on not for a day or a week. This goes on for a long period of time. Is that not true?
It is true.
Yeah. And so when people begin to say, was there bias on the part of Peter Strzok, they're not saying, oh, gee, on this one, just on August 8th. They're going for a whole accumulation and aggregation of various statements that you made and that Ms. Page made as well. So that leads us to the IG statement. So when the Inspector General comes in and I ask him the question, I said, look, you've said regarding Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page, you didn't find documentary testimony evidence that they had improper considerations, including political bias, directly affecting. I said, that's directly affecting, because you said they weren't the sole decision makers. I said, did they indirectly affect it? He said, yeah. Why?
because he said you were the lead investigator of the Hillary Clinton. You were the liaison, if you will. You were the flow of information from the investigative team that you've said there's lots of them, and I kind of actually sketched a kind of a Venn diagram of how this works, organizational chart as it works, as you were describing it earlier today. You were the gatekeeper of information. Lisa Page was providing counsel to Andrew McCabe. On the Russian investigation, you were the head guy. You're the head guy. Now we have accumulation of biased information that indicates some kind of mental state of bias. And at the other end of this, we've got it that you're the head guy on these. That's what the Inspector General said under oath in testimony not too many weeks ago.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, if I may respond, I think
there's no question before you.
I want to correct some inaccurate things you said.
I didn't say anything inaccurate.
Oh,
there's
you did.
nothing to correct.
The witness needs to be able to answer the
you're
question.
Out of order.
The witness needs to be answering the question.
Mr. Chairman, when aspersions are cast on the witness, you ought to be able. Oh, there were.
Well, you should allow the witness to answer.
Everyone,
Why are you afraid to let the witness answer the question?
Everyone will suspend, and the time of the gentleman has expired, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Sir, may I respond to the gentleman who just spoke?
No, you may not. The gentleman from Wisconsin has the time.
Mr. Chairman, you have said throughout this hearing that at the conclusion of the questioning, the witness would be permitted to respond. Is that rule now changed?
No question directed to him.
That's not true, Mr. Chairman.
It is true.
Well, he has a response he'd like to give to the committee. You said throughout the day that was the procedure. Now you're changing it. We're just going to allow people to make claims.
The gentleman is completely out of order.
No, Mr. Chairman, you're out of order.
No, the time belongs to the gentleman from Wisconsin, and he may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, you indicated, you must remember that
The
you
gentleman
indicated
is
that the
not in
gentleman
order.
could
The
answer
chair-
the question.
The chair has recognized.
I
the
beg
gentleman
of
from
you to allow the gentleman, at the end of this long hearing, to be able to explain conflicts in representation that have been made by various persons on the panel.
The gentleman from Wisconsin may proceed.
It seems to me that on advice of counsel, a lot of the things we want to find out here today, we're not going to find out. But I'd like to focus a little bit on the milieu in which you operate in the FBI. When I look at this area around Washington, D.C., I look, and we had a candidate run for president who ran on the promise to drain the swamp. When I look at the election results in the areas in which you and other people who work for the government around here live, I see a monolithic, almost monolithic mindset that can be illustrated in the election results in the area. Things that, given the country as a whole, was almost half for the candidate who wanted to drain the swamp and half for the candidate who didn't. You look District of Columbia, 4% for Donald Trump. Prince George County, 8%. Arlington, Virginia, 17%. Alexandria, 18%. I mean, things that in Wisconsin, 72 counties, and normally we're about a 50-50 state. There's not one county in which you have that, everybody voting together. So I want to dig into a little bit about the milieu in which you hang around with. Now, at the time where Mr. McCabe, who I believe was Miss Page's boss, at the time his wife ran for Congress, or was Congress, or was it maybe a state elected position, you referred to people who lived in a county just beyond Washington, D.C., a little bit more normal, still a Democratic county. You referred to them as this county, Loudoun County, is being gentrified, but it's still largely ignorant hillbillies. Now, I don't mean to embarrass you in that, because it doesn't surprise me that people in this swamp would refer to people, once you get a couple hours away from Washington, as ignorant hillbillies. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody was inadvertently got a hold of emails and people were saying that in the newsroom at MSNBC. It wouldn't surprise me if they were saying it in the Department of Interior or the Department of Education. It disappoints me a little bit that they were saying it in the FBI. But I'm going to ask you, in the areas of which people you congregate in your business, how you obviously talked about politics. How many people do you run into, say, in the Washington office here, who are overtly supporting President Trump?
When you say in the office, sir, a couple of things, and you may not have been here this morning. I certainly I do not view the people of Loudoun County as ignorant hillbillies. I live in an adjacent county, and much like in Wisconsin, you might look at folks in Minnesota with a sense of rivalry.
I know people like you.
I regret that statement, and
I know you regret it. I know
it's
it's one of those things that you never thought would come out. But
when you say the office, sir, I don't understand what you mean by around the office.
People who you work with on a daily basis.
I don't tend to know who they support, sir.
Well, it's apparent in the emails that you exchanged with Ms. Page. That not only with regard to her opinions, but you could obviously, the McCabe's were very political in nature. You must have some general opinions of the politics of the people you work around. You were not shy about sharing your political opinions.
Right. My sense is the FBI, including me, is a very conservative, typically, organization. They believe in law and order. They believe in a strong national defense.
I'm going to say, when it comes
traditionally, sir, that
to draining the
skew
swamp or
Republican, in my
otherwise.
experience. I'm sorry, sir?
In areas in which I've worked in the past, prior to getting involved in politics, I could almost always tell you or have an opinion where people come down to on these issues. You are not shy about talking about politics. I want to know, in the social circle that you hang around with, including at work, maybe you get at home, do you ever run into people who would have voted for President Trump, people who you know?
Yes.
Would you guess in the FBI, like I said, we rattled off the percentage of people voting for President Trump in the surrounding counties. Looks like overall maybe less than 1 in 6, just amazing. Could you comment again on your comment, largely ignorant hillbillies? And there are a lot of people who think like you in this swamp. Okay, it's not unusual, probably a lot of lobbyists probably feel that way. Congressional staffers. Could you comment in general on the political viewpoint of the people who work in the Washington office with you?
The general perspective, as I just said, sir, the most FBI agents, in my experience, tend to be strongly conservative.
Not outside of Washington.
Strongly law in Washington, D.C. Strongly conservative, strongly law and order, strongly national defense. Up until the current date, very strongly Republican. I don't know, I couldn't tell you what people did or didn't vote for this election because we don't tend to talk about that.
Guess I'm out of time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Gomez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you've been on that hot seat for a number of hours. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. First, thank you for being here. Thank you for trying to answer the questions as to the best of your ability. But I want to give you at least 45 seconds to respond to any of the comments that have been made that you feel like you haven't been given the opportunity to respond to.
Sir, I appreciate that. And one thing, two things. One, with regard to the IG and what they found, to be clear, the IG report found no act of bias by me or anybody in the FBI, period. And he said in his testimony, my understanding is the same. Two, the IG found and stated in the report that I was amongst the most aggressive people in pursuing the Hillary Clinton investigation, going after Secretary Clinton. So those facts are undisputable. They're written down, and there's no two ways to try and spin out of those. And I don't want to take your time, and so I'll try and do this in 15 seconds. The insurance policy text that has come up before, that text represented a debate on information that we had received from an extraordinarily sensitive source and method, and that typically when something is that sensitive, if you take action on it, you put it at risk. And so there's a tension there. Maybe we should, just roll slow, take a typical 3-4 year counterintelligence investigation, because the more aggressive you are, the more you put it at risk. And some people said that. Some people said, hey, look, every poll is saying candidate Trump is likely not to win. Every Republican was saying that. Some people said as a result of that, let's not risk this source. Let's go slow. What I advocated for and what I'm saying is, look, we're the FBI. We need to do our job. We need to go investigate. While it isn't likely, according to all the pollsters and everybody, that candidate Trump's going to be elected, we need to make sure we are protecting America. We need to responsibly and aggressively investigate these accusations, because you know what? If candidate Trump is elected, there might be people we need to be investigating that might be nominated for important national security positions. Everybody in America would want to know that. Candidate Trump would want to know that. So much like you probably won't die before you're 40.
No, thank you.
That's the meaning, sir.
No, thank you so much. I got sworn in July 11th, 2017. So I am one of the most freshman members of Congress. It was about a year ago yesterday. And I was excited to be on the Oversight Committee because I believe that Congress has a responsibility to be a check on the executive branch. But that's when it's being honest in its purpose, right? I don't believe our committees, led by the majority, has been honest in its purpose. Because if it has been, it would be treating requests by the minority with as much importance as their own. So I have a question. It's a rhetorical question. Why is it that the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee have refused to issue a single subpoena to compel documents or witnesses from the Trump administration on any topic other than this one? It's because they don't believe and they don't care to discover the truth. They are using this process to throw more red meat to their base in order to turn it out for the midterms and to protect a president that has no moral authority to lead this country. So it is kind of embarrassing. I've been watching this farce and this circus for the last 5 hours, and I wonder to myself, what are people thinking? That there's grown men and women shouting over each other, insulting one another. Yeah, they try to dress it up with saying the gentleman from North Carolina, the gentle lady from California. But it's all a farce, and the American people know it. We've asked for subpoenas for a variety of issues. Commerce Department and the Census Bureau withholding documents on citizenship question. Department of Justice withholding documents on request to add a citizenship question. Department of Justice withholding documents on politicized hiring allegations for immigration judges. Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice withholding documents on gag orders against whistleblowers. White House withholding information on chartered flights. The list goes on. There's about 12 of them. But they have never issued a subpoena except on this. And the American people should ask why? Why? And the reason is because they're not interested in finding the truth or making sure that we hold this administration accountable. It's all for tossing red meat to their base. And you know what? We should never talk ill about anybody, in any particular part of our country. But this president has lowered that standard. He questions immigrants. He questions the allegiance of judges, the FBI, and that, in my opinion, is insulting. And I think that we need to grow up and show that the American people that we're here to act as a responsible branch of government. And I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, when I hear you talk about your passion for America, I believe you. I can see that passion. When you talk about your love for the FBI, I see it. I believe it. When you talked about your faith in the American electorate, I believe that. Now, what concerns me is you said that you didn't trust the election. To quote you, you didn't trust the election after Russia put their finger on the scale. Remember saying that earlier?
I don't believe that's exactly what I said, sir. I think I said something slightly different, but I recall that exchange.
Well, but that was that was the meaning, right?
I don't think that was the meaning, sir. The meaning was I was very concerned that Russia was attempting to do that. I prayed.
Russia had put their finger on the scale.
I don't recall what I said specifically.
You can find it later, but I wrote it down.
Okay, I will be happy to tell you what I felt.
And what I want to ask you is, do you think that justifies, then, you, Mr. McCabe, and Lisa Page to correct that wrong that you perceived was done by the FBI?
That never happened, and that would not happen.
Let me ask you, the IG's report that I have right here, you said that political bias did not impact your professional actions. You said that earlier in this meeting as well. Now, let me give you a little background. In a text message sent on August 15th, and this has been discussed earlier, You wrote to Lisa Page, I want to believe the path you threw out in Andy's office, that there is no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
Yes, sir.
Certainly remember that. You've heard it a lot. The reason, was there anyone else in that meeting?
I'm sure there was. I don't remember who.
But, so you don't remember who all was it?
There were an inordinate number of meetings. We're the government. We have meetings. I don't remember for this particular meeting who was there.
Okay.
I could look at my notes.
But at least
maybe
two of those people that were in that meeting with you are no longer working for the FBI, are they?
I don't know that Mr. McCabe was there.
You don't know that Mr. McCabe was in the office?
He was in the office. My recollection of that meeting is that we had a briefing to the director. Sometimes after briefings like that, the director will stay behind with his very senior staff, like the general counsel and the deputy. And if we have other matters to discuss that don't merit the importance of the director's time, we'll go down to the deputy's office and wait for him to return. So he may have been there, he may not have been there, I don't recall.
But Mr. McCabe is no longer working at the FBI, is that correct?
That is correct.
How about Lisa Page?
She is not.
Anybody else that was in that meeting that you recall that no longer works at the FBI?
Possibly Mr. Baker, but I don't know if he was in the meeting or not.
Okay, let me ask.
Yeah, that's it. Possibly, I don't think Mr. Rubicki went down either.
Okay, let me ask, did you present the original FISA application?
No. So, sir, when I assume you were talking about the FISA application on Carter Page that I've been limited ability to answer questions.
Correct.
I did not.
Were you in the courtroom?
No.
Okay, and do you, and there were 3 renewals, correct?
Sir, I'm not certain. I can discuss that without divulging classified information, and I don't know that I've been given clearance by the FBI to discuss that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rosenstein was here and admitted that he signed the 3rd renewal.
I certainly defer to his statement, sir.
And he signed that 3rd renewal, but amazingly to me, Mr. Strzok, apparently because of the information that was in that renewal, he would not admit that he actually read the document. Do you know of any falsehood, any half-truth, any misinformation that was in that 3rd renewal that would preclude him from being able to say he read it and he signed it and approved it?
I have no information about the Deputy Attorney General and what he did or didn't do or why he did or did not do anything.
Okay, you said that political bias didn't affect your work, but the FBI and DOJ were both admonished for misconduct in the prosecution of Senator Ted Stevens, right?
Sir, I don't.
Time of the gentleman.
I was not involved in that investigation. I don't.
Okay, well, former Director Comey
the time
said
of the gentleman has expired. The witness can answer the question.
Okay. Do you know that they're undergoing training right now for political bias at the FBI? Is that correct?
I understand that was a recommendation in the IG report.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, despite your assertions that the IG report did not in any way indicate bias, I would disagree with that. But also, on page 424 of the Inspector General's report, he said that we therefore refer this information to the FBI for its handling and consideration of whether the messages sent by the 5 employees, of whom you're one, listed above, violates the FBI's offense code of conduct. Are you under review by the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. In January 2014, the Inspector General for the intelligence community, Mr. Charles McCullough, sent out a letter and indicated that he had received 2 sworn declarations from one intelligence community element. These declarations cover several dozen emails containing classified information determined by the intelligence community element to be at the confidential, secret, and top secret special access program levels, which were you aware of this letter?
What was the date of the letter?
January 14th, 2016.
I don't recall it now, but I may have known it at the time. Correspondence like that, sir, we had a team of anywhere from 20 to 60 people, so.
Well, this is, I understand that you can't know everything, and I get it. And I also want you to understand that I'm not going to be necessarily in an attack mode, because I want to get some answers.
Absolutely.
And this is a very, very serious problem that's raised by this letter, whether it's confidential, secret, top secret, but certainly special access program. You're former military, correct?
Yes, sir.
You can understand then the danger that this could pose for our men and women in harm's way.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This was January, and again, on March 4th, you send the text saying that Hillary should win $100 million to nothing. Then on May 4th is when you said, now the pressure really starts to finish the mid-year evaluation. At what point in there was the memo changed from gross negligence to extremely careless?
Sir,
it was in May.
I'm not going to be able to give you a.
I'm not asking for a date, but
calendar. I can't give you a breakdown of what occurred before what. I'm sorry.
And I understand you've been here a long time, and so have we, but it was in May.
Okay.
And what appears here, and it's in the context of the need to finish the mid-year investigation, is that Donald Trump had just won the primary. It was obvious that he was going to be the Republican nominee. And I believe you when you say you're a patriot. I believe that you care deeply about the country, and I can see how you and some of your colleagues have concluded that it's in the best interest to change it from gross negligence to extremely careless, because you just couldn't comprehend a President Trump or in your mind the danger that might pose to the country.
That's not what happened, sir.
Well, something happened to change this from gross negligence to extremely careless, because extremely careless is not prosecutable.
I can tell you why it happened if you'd like me to answer, but I don't want to take your time if you don't.
Well, I know what the Inspector General said he thought happened. He said it was changed because it wasn't prosecutable, because it's not in the code. The Espionage Act doesn't have anything in the criteria for extremely careless. So I think, again, trying to give you some credit for your patriotism and your desire to do what's best for the country. I mean, our history is replete with people who've made decisions that they thought were the right decisions at the time that got outside the lines. And the text messages and the fact that clearly there is a bias. And I get it. We all have biases. It's what we do with them. It's how we act on them, how we are able to compartmentalize these things that determine the course of things, really the course of history. In the last few seconds here, I want to tell you that I appreciate the fact that you sought forgiveness from your family. I appreciate the fact that you realize that you have severely damaged the reputation of the FBI. And we're not here about the FBI. We're about hearing about you and what you did. I literally sat here, and I mean this sincerely, and prayed for you and your family, because that I can't imagine what your family's feeling going through this. And I'm not going to question your integrity, but I will say this to you, and I hope this is constructive. I hope you take it as constructive. As I've watched your body language, as I've watched your facial expressions, it's almost as though you've enjoyed this. This is a competition for you, in many respects, even now.
So I can tell you,
and I don't think I'm not going to say your problem's a lack of integrity. I think it's a problem with hubris, and I think you need to take that into account in regard to how you handle this going forward, because it makes it more difficult for us to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman. Okay. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman may briefly respond.
Thank you. Oh, no, sir. I appreciate your prayers. Sir, I can tell you when you look at what happened in the investigation, everything was done by the book. And you can assure yourself and your constituents and everybody you're talking to, when you look at both investigations, notwithstanding what decisions were made at a high level to say something, not say something, when you look at the investigation, what those men and women did, everything was done right and by the book. And I share your concern about the nature of the classified information. We found a bunch. TS, Special Access Program, confidential and secret. All that was found, all that was detailed in Director Comey's statement, so I appreciate it. But
in regard to that, I want you to understand, everybody here who
knows... The gentleman's time has expired.
Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry. Relating to the rules of this hearing, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
gentleman will state her parliamentary inquiry.
The witness had attempted to answer the gentleman's question.
And he was allowed to.
Mr. Chairman, just a moment, please. On a question that's been asked over and over again about the gross mismanagement, gross negligence issue. And the witness was not allowed at that time to give the clarification. I think the record deserves the gentleman's clarification about the gross
The gentlewoman has not stated a parliamentary
negligence,
inquiry.
which was not written by the gentleman, as I understand.
The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Handel, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Agent Strzok, for being here. I have found your testimony today, frankly, to be quite remarkable in its disingenuousness. And you have shown a disturbing degree of denialism about your actions and the impact of those actions. I think we would all agree that everyone does have personal viewpoints. That is very true. But Agent Strzok, there is a very big difference between someone expressing his or her political views generally and someone leading an FBI investigation, making highly negative and explosive comments about the actual target of that investigation. Would you agree? That's a yes or no.
Rephrase the question. I don't understand the.
You have a really
yes or no of that.
awesome talent for filibustering. You might want to think about running for the Senate. I'll just say again, you were the lead investigator, one of the lead investigators, and you made highly negative and explosive comments about the actual target of an investigation. That is distinctly different from an individual expressing his or her political views. You were in a position that you needed to be at a higher, much higher level of standard, and you failed to reach that. Your assertion that your statements do not constitute bias is, well, absurd. The facts are this. The FBI Inspector General testified before this very body that you did indeed exhibit bias. And further, in his report, he detailed numerous examples of investigated steps that were not, quote, by the books, as you just testified. What I also find stunning is that someone in your role with the responsibilities that you've had engaged in such grossly unprofessional, unacceptable, and unethical behavior. And now, truly ironic, did I hear you say earlier that you're in a senior position in the HR division for the FBI?
Yes, ma'am. Currently the AD.
That's very ironic. So let me ask you this. You were in a supervisory role at the FBI. Suppose you found out that one of your direct reports was sending the kind of text messages that you were sending about the target of an investigation that they were working on. What action would you take?
Ma'am, if they were sending personal opinion about a political matter, that's their business. I think given my experience to date, I would caution them against doing that on a government device. That is entirely separate and distinct from an individual that was not a political candidate, that did not have a kind of First Amendment protection attached to it.
Right. Suppose that you found out that one of your direct reports was having an extramarital affair with a colleague or with someone outside of the Bureau. What action would you take?
Ma'am, it depends. If it was against the FBI's regulation in terms of if it was somebody in their chain of command above or below them, which is inappropriate or not allowed by our regulations, I would tell them and report that. If it was otherwise permitted in our regulations, I would probably talk to them and say, hey, look, you know, I'm aware of this, and you need to be aware that, and just take into consideration what you're doing in the appearance of it.
So obviously you understand the gravity of the transgressions, engaging in the kind of behavior that you've been engaging in, especially with the extramarital affair. It opens up an agent to exploitation and even blackmail, given the fact that you have and currently hold a high-level security clearance. Did you ever discuss your relationship with Ms. Page with HR? Or anyone around your security clearance?
They were well aware of it
When did they become aware of it?
Well, when it was kind of made very public by the media after it was leaked
it was
late
in
last
the
year.
press.
But ma'am, I can
You
tell you,
didn't
if I can,
proactively
your
tell
premise
them.
though that it makes it susceptible to blackmail, I never could have been blackmailed or coerced by the nature of that relationship. That is not the nature of my patriotism and the nature of what I believe in this country.
You are asked a question about that. There's a
Nobody
reason that security clearances ask those kinds of questions. Did you ever advise Mr. Mueller of your relationship with Ms. Page?
I did not.
Why?
it didn't strike me as relevant.
You have a lot to learn about human resources. I mean, wow. It is absolutely relevant. There should have been conversations. I find it interesting that there was no discussion that the two of you shouldn't both be together on that same investigation. Mr. Strzok, no reasonable person could not be concerned about your actions in this investigation. No reasonable person could not be concerned about this situation involving yourself. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your testimony and your service. It's been a long day, and I admire your resume. I came from a similar background. I went to a Catholic high school and a Catholic college. I remember going to Holy Cross and having people say, the graduates from Harvard and Yale make the laws, but the graduates from Holy Cross and Fordham enforce the laws. And we always took great pride in that because I think you as well, and I, having had friends who served in the Bureau, took great pride in that that education reinforced your ethical beliefs in a difficult world where we all make mistakes, and that's part of our humanity. So I admire your work. I must say I'm discouraged today to have listened to much of this hearing. On many levels, I'm discouraged because I consider many of the people on the other side of the aisle as friends, good friends. I must say this reminds me of what it must have been like to sit through the McCarthy hearings. I'm waiting for that moment at long last. Do you have no shame? But maybe that's to come. Having said that, I am troubled by the fact that someone in your background did what you did. But you and I both believe in redemption, so I think you have acted in that way today. I wanted to ask you a couple, just a comment and a question specifically for one case. So there's been a persistent conspiracy theory about Hillary Clinton email investigation and one of your former colleagues, John Jackalone, the executive assistant director for the FBI's National Security Branch. He left the FBI because he was upset that there was a bias in the Clinton case, so the conspiracy theorists say, and going, quote, sideways, or, quote, nowhere by design. So he responded in testimony in front of our committee on June 21st and said that these allegations were completely false, quote, unquote, nonsense. Quote, he said, totally inaccurate, this is all nonsense, almost the whole thing is nonsense. I'd have to read it again to definitively say that, but from what I recall, I didn't leave because I was disgruntled, I left because I was broke. He continues, I loved every minute I spent in the FBI. I had one bad day in 25 years, and that was on 9/11. And I think it was a bad day for a lot of people and for this country. So there's no way I left because I was sideways or because I was disgruntled. I was purely the right time for me, 25 years in, right opportunity. I never spoke to anybody that wrote the internet article. I don't know who they used it, the source to this thing. He further said, explaining the Clinton case from the outset, he said, quote, I fully recognized right at the gate that it was a political bombshell, that we, meaning the FBI, were an apolitical organization, right? So I had the referral, we were going to open up the case, and we were going to wait to put together a team, and we were going to conduct a thorough down-the-middle investigation, which is what we did, end quotes. And then starting again in quotes, he said about Director Comey, he's a straight-ahead guy, right, I mean, and you know, if the evidence existed, he would have pushed it for prosecution. And then about you, he said, quote, there was no indication that he exhibited any bias while he was conducting the investigation while he was working for me. He went 110 miles an hour, and we were always looking for new ways to uncover information and evidence. So I had no indication that he would politically lean the way I guess some of these text messages show that he leaned. At no point in time during my management of this case did he exhibit anything that would provide any slight indication of some of those things that were, you know, posted and put out to the media, end quotes. Do you have any comments on your former colleague's comments?
Sir,
or what he's had to go through?
I deeply appreciate them. Mr. Jackalone is an extraordinary agent with a heart of gold, and I appreciate them.
So just in closing, I'm just curious, and not to be redundant, but really want to sort of reiterate, you were nonpartisan in your comments and criticisms, which I think is fair. My dad used to be a state Superior Court judge in Massachusetts, and I remember one of my siblings, once active in politics, put a bumper sticker in his car, and he went ballistic. There was no question that he was a very committed Republican, but he was concerned about the perception. So sitting here today after all these hours, is there any one thing that you can encapsulate what the Bureau could learn from this experience to make sure no one would sit where you're sitting again?
Sir, there is. My belief is that these texts would never be public. And whether reasonable or not, they were made public. And I deeply regret certainly the appearance that they created and all the way that manifested itself out, personally, with regard to the Bureau. So at the end of the day, we're judged on our actions. Certainly, you know, what I do with regard to my personal matters is my own business. But I would also say I take some comfort that when I look at my actions in the workplace, that they are proper, that they are correct, that they were done for the right reasons and done in the right way. And so whenever I get ups and downs in this experience, I look at that record of work, and it gives me considerable comfort that it was done right and well. So,
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were the lead investigator in the Clinton email investigation. Were there ever any searches for emails with the ClintonEmail.com route on the government data warehouse that would have held data collected through 702 or other FISA authorities?
Sir, I would have to think about that. I
think hard.
Rephrase the question. Were there any searches of the Clinton email?
The IG report talks about servers that were searched and devices that were searched. Were there ever searches done on the data warehouse system that would contain data collected pursuant to FISA or 702?
So when you say data warehouse system, you're referring to any FBI data system that would house FISA or 702
Correct.
data? Yes, sir, I believe there were.
There were. Did you know if anything was found on those?
Not offhand, I don't.
It's not referenced in the IG report whether that was searched. On page 96 of the IG's report, it said that investigators learned late in their review that the FBI considered seeking access to certain highly classified materials that may have included information relevant to the mid-year investigation, but ultimately did not do so. Furthermore, unnamed FBI Attorney 1 went so far as to say that review of those materials was necessary to complete mid-year, and even started to draft a memo about it. And per the IG, you thought reviewing those emails would have been a logical investigative step. Who stopped it?
I don't know. It was levels above me. My understanding was it was outside the Bureau that was stopped.
Did you object to that?
I disagreed. I wanted to search it. We're getting very close to classified information, so I want to be very careful.
Did you send an email or a memo to that effect that you said, we need to search this?
Sir, I don't recall the nature of what that discussion was. I remember talking about doing it and wanting to do it.
As a counterintel officer, did you know if any other non-DOJ government officials have reviewed the classified materials in question in this case?
I don't know.
Did any non-DOJ personnel communicate with anyone at the FBI or DOJ or to mid-year personnel about this classified material?
Sir, I can't answer that question without providing or without saying.
Do you know if anybody on the mid-year team, FBI or DOJ, ever briefed anyone at the White House about such classified material as a potential related to mid-year?
I don't know. I'm not aware of it, but I don't know.
Who had the most influence on mid-year investigators' belief that this classified material was ultimately not necessary and would not have a material impact?
Sir, those are two different questions. There's an investigative question, which is the leader of the team, which included the senior investigators, had a desire to do something, and then there was a decision at a much higher level and at a different organizational spot that was well above and over.
Now, this was all happening in May of 2016. Was there a rush to wrap this up?
This was not all happening in May of 16.
Well, it's according to the IG report, this was all coming out in May of 16.
Sir, there may have been aspects of that discussion in May of 16, but my My recollection is that this was broader than that.
On page 96 of the IG's report, it said investigators learned late in their review that the FBI considered seeking access to certain highly classified materials.
I think that says that's when the IG learned about it, sir, if I'm not mistaken on that reading. Sir, I don't remember specifically when this came up in the context of midyear. I could not tell you when I first became aware.
And you were the
of
lead
classified
investigator
matter
at
issue.
midyear, right?
I was.
Yeah, okay. Did during midyear exam,
Sir, I was not.
during midyear exam, did investigators find any emails between Secretary Clinton and President Obama, including any emails that would have used aliases?
Including any emails?
Emails that would have used aliases.
Yes.
Did any of those emails contain classified information?
With President Obama?
Between Mrs. Clinton and President Obama?
I don't believe so, but I would have to verify that with the case file, sir.
Do you know if any of those emails were ever intercepted by a foreign actor?
I don't know.
On page
when you say any emails, sir, are you talking about emails between Secretary Clinton and President Obama?
Yes.
Or any emails contain classified?
No, between Secretary Clinton and President Obama.
I don't know.
On page 149 of the IG report, it noted that he found evidence that you advocated for more aggressive tactics in the Clinton investigation, like grand jury subpoenas and search warrants. Ultimately, the midyear team decided to go with the kid glove approach using consent agreements. I can think of some recent high-profile examples where federal agents did not use the kid treatment. Relating to midyear, who specifically had the authority to decide not to use compulsory process to obtain evidence in this investigation?
Sir, I'm certain the IG did not use the phrase kid glove. The decision ultimately about whether or not to issue process rests with the prosecutors.
Did anyone outside of the midyear team suggest to the team not to use an aggressive approach?
There was a constant debate, which is normal and healthy, between the agents and the attorneys about how aggressive to be. My recollection is that
anybody outside the midyear team. You're talking about people on the midyear team.
Not that I know.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
No, not to my recollection. There's nobody outside the midyear team that was exerting any pressure one way or the other.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, Hillary Clinton has said publicly that FBI Director James Comey cost her the election. Do you share Hillary Clinton's opinion?
Sir, I don't know. I've read a lot of pollsters and a lot of speculation, but I don't know.
It's an important question because you think about Hillary Clinton making a statement like that about the FBI and the FBI director, as well as the statements that President Trump has made recently about the FBI, and those are the two leaders of each party in the last presidential election, so I think it does matter. Out of curiosity, are there any recordings of the interviews of the Clinton email investigation?
No, sir, I don't believe we recorded any interviews.
So none of the interviews were recorded?
To the best of my recollection, sir, I would need to review the case file, but I don't believe any were.
Is that normal for
Yes.
an investigation of that size?
Yes.
Mr. Strzok, did you consult with James Comey before he made the decision to go public days before the presidential election with the fact that the FBI was going to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails once it was determined that Anthony Weiner had access to the emails and potentially had access to classified information? Did you consult with James Comey before he made that decision?
I was present at meetings where that decision was discussed.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Sir, that's also a difficult question. I think for all of us, it was kind of a 51-49 proposition. I came out of that decision comfortable with doing so.
Did Ms. Page consult with James Comey before he made the decision to go public?
You'd have to ask her, sir. I don't know that she did, but
well, we hope to get to ask her some questions. Do you think that James Comey leaked out well, let me back up. In a text message from you to Ms. Page, you mentioned insurance policy. That's been referenced many times today. What exactly did you mean by having an insurance policy in case, I would assume, President Trump won the election or was looking like he was going to win the election?
Sir, I appreciate that question because it is taken very much, I understand it's ambiguous and that people have taken it out of context. The insurance policy was merely an analogy to you do something when something isn't likely to happen. You're probably not going to die before you're 40, but you have an insurance policy anyway. What we had before us was an allegation that something significant, that members of the Trump campaign may have been working in cooperation with the Russians, and some people were saying, hey, look, this sensitive source of information that's so so sensitive, so vulnerable, we shouldn't put it in danger, because sometimes if you go out and do aggressive investigation, if it's a drug snitch or intelligence source, you can cause significant harm. And a lot of people looked and said, hey, well, look, all the pollsters, everybody in the world is saying it's not likely that President Trump's going to be elected, so don't worry about it. We can just let this lie. I had a different view, and I said, you know what? It doesn't matter whether or not he's going to be elected. We need to do our job. We're the FBI. We need to aggressively go out there, pursue the allegations, because
let me ask you this.
But I want to
Mr.
finish
Strzok,
up because
you've
I
answered
get to
the question. Do you think that James Comey leaked out about the reopening of the Hillary email investigation because he needed a, quote, insurance policy to cover his back for predetermining that Hillary Clinton was innocent in the email investigation before it ever even began?
I don't think Director Comey leaked anything with regard to that I'm aware of with regard to the Clinton investigation. I certainly do not think he, I, or anybody else viewed any investigation or any step in the sense of what you're saying that we needed to do something to prevent any particular action at all.
With respect to the clear bias of Donald Trump in your text messages and your clear prejudice against the Trump voters, and by the way, I'm one of those smelly hillbillies from Appalachia that you referenced in your text, you were in a supervisory role at the FBI. What would you do if you found a text from a subordinate of yours that exhibited the same type of bias that you had towards a group of people that were key witnesses or key whatever to the investigation? How would you handle that scenario?
Sir, if I found a text for a subordinate that was expressing a political opinion, one, I don't think I'd see it, and two, I think it's entirely appropriate. If your question is the text was about a target of an investigation, talking about the target, that's an entirely different matter, and I'd bring that subordinate in and counsel him. But those are apples and oranges. They are not at all the same.
Well, I will conclude by this statement, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this is a bad day for the FBI. I believe that we have an overwhelming majority of quality FBI agents and intelligence agents all across the United States and all across the world. But it's unfortunate that when reading the Inspector General's report and sitting here listening to your testimony, watching the reactions from some of your colleagues behind you with rolling their eyes and frowning faces, and you know, it's just very discouraging as a member of Congress that we've tried this hard to get information. The American people want to know. This Russia investigation has been going on for a long time. Many believe that it is a witch hunt. It needs to wrap up, but from what we've heard today, you know, there are a lot of problems with your credibility as the lead agent in the entire Russia investigation. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Does the gentlewoman from Texas, before we close, and we will now be closing, does the gentleman from Texas desire a couple of minutes to make any closing remarks?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. This has been a long day. First, let me thank the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the agents that I've worked with in my years of service on Judiciary, Homeland Security, the aftermath of 9/11, which I had the lack of distinguished position to be in the United States Congress during 9/11 and certainly in the aftermath of the investigation. Let me thank the FBI and Mr. Strzok for their service. Let me quickly say this and then conclude my remarks. I want it to be clear that General Flynn, in his offense, asked the Russian ambassador to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia. Following, a whistleblower then said that he referred this to Mr. Flynn, that the sanctions would be, quote, ripped up to allow money to start flowing to one of Flynn's business projects. Did you have anything to do with any comments by General Flynn?
This is not for asking questions, Ms. Jackson.
I will leave that on the record, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
I thought that it would be good to clarify it because I've asked others, but let me finish my remarks. In the concluding comments, Mr. Strzok, again, I believe this hearing in its long period of time showed no bias in the decisions regarding the final report on Hillary Clinton's emails. She was vindicated. Nothing changes the Russian interference in our elections of 2016. Unfortunately, no questions were asked by the Republicans about the Russian interference. And the GOP, in many instances, would not let you, Mr. Strzok, answer the questions. Finally, the hearing did not give the American people, I think, the important answers that they needed, and that is, how will we secure our elections in 2018? That, unfortunately, plays into Putin's hands. It also did not respond or did not answer, what do you do when White House officials have not gotten their own security clearance? And finally, let me be very clear. When our country is attacked, I want to make sure that the FBI and not the KGB shows up. We need to do a better job of answering the concerns of children that have been snatched away from their parents, the violation of voting rights, the need to end gun violence, and many other issues. But today you stood the test of time, at least. You've admitted fault and certainly admitted that you would have wanted to do things in a better way, as I've gleaned from your testimony. But it cannot take away your service in the United States military, your service to the FBI, and your willingness to offer, if you will, your deference and your concern about the continuation of the FBI and its service to this nation. Mr. Chairman, I hope that the Judiciary Committee and Oversight Chairman, I believe, is not present, but in any event, that we will take up the issues that the American people desire and that we will solve problems of which are important to the democracy, security, and the values of this nation. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. Many members on the other side of the aisle have attempted to denigrate this investigation and, in particular, this hearing today, one going so far as to calling it stupid. This investigation and hearing aren't just about reviewing the 2016 election, however important that is. This is a much bigger matter. Our investigation and this hearing goes to a larger global and existential issue of equality under the law. So for my Democratic colleagues to call this review stupid denigrates the importance of our founding principles and the core of a system of justice. I'd venture to guess that most Americans don't view equality under the law and fair and unbiased investigations as stupid. Mr. Strzok, this has been a lengthy hearing, so thank you for your time today. It has been extraordinarily frustrating, though, in trying to get answers to many important questions. I understand that you have refused to answer many questions on advice of the FBI. You have also said that you cannot answer questions on advice of counsel because they could disrupt the ongoing Mueller investigation. So we are presented with a situation where you have not answered questions from Congress under the cover of the FBI and Special Counsel Mueller. Neither the FBI nor the Special Counsel is mentioned in the Constitution. Congress is, and we have a constitutional right to have answers to the many questions that have been posed to you. While you have consistently referred to the FBI as the ultimate arbiter who is preventing you from answering questions today, the FBI director reports to the Deputy Attorney General. The FBI is a component of the Department of Justice. So at the end of the day, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, who has oversight over the Federal Bureau of Investigation and of the Mueller investigation, is where the buck stops. We now consider the department on the line, in addition to the FBI, for failing to permit you to answer questions that don't even go to the substance of any investigation, but have focused on your involvement in the process of those investigations. This is unacceptable. Congress has been blocked today from conducting its constitutional oversight duty, and more importantly, the American people have not received answers on why our chief law enforcement agencies and agents and lawyers operating within them permitted improper bias to permeate through 3 of the most important investigations in our nation's history. The Constitution's construct of congressional oversight over the executive branch has been severely undermined today. We will resist attempts to prevent us from getting to the facts. This is not over, and you, as well as future witnesses, are on notice that fulsome answers are expected promptly. With that, this hearing is adjourned.